Is South Africa's 30% pass mark hurting pupils and the education system? Well, one South Africa movement leader, Mmusi Maimane, seems to think so. He's urged government to announce results based on a 50% pass to reveal the real state of our education system. Maimane says education is the key to fixing South Africa's economic struggles. He speaks to us now virtually. Thank you very much for your time here on All Angles. Now, of course, a lot of people would have agreed with you. I mean, I remember in my day, the pass mark was 45%. I was also shocked to realize that it's gone down to 30%. Are you not accepting of the reasons behind the Education Department's decision to make the pass mark 30%?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to fellow South Africans. I certainly hold the absolute view that says that our government, whilst has increased access to education, has not improved the quality of that education. On first instance, if you are asking citizens to pass at 30%, these are your next crop of professionals who have to compete for university entrance. And on that basis alone, I think we're diminishing the ultimate capability of our nation. Second, I think that to reduce the pass rate to 30%, if you were to convert that to 50%, you'd discover very quickly that actually our reported upon pass rate annually decreases significantly. Thirdly, that if you put 30% on key subjects such as maths and science, it means that the South African economy is not going to produce graduates or certainly matriculants who are able to compete in the fourth industrial revolution in a future world of work. So what we are in fact doing as a country is ensuring that for future generations, South Africa's own labor pool is not competitive relative to the rest of the world. And so I think this question of education and the standards of passing ought to be something that we reflect on deeply and simply say to ourselves, we cannot perpetuate the levels of inequality in education and ultimately asking our young people to pass at 30%, because we are not asking a lot of them. It means we don't believe in our young people and we think that they're okay to pass at 30%, which I think, to me, is an undermining of the intellect of our young people.
And what about the teachers? You know, the belief in the teachers to give South Africa pupils that can pass by 50% and above?
Certainly. And I think that part of the legacy of our country is that we've had varying degrees of qualifications for teachers. Now, whilst a lot of work has been done in training educators, whether it's through the bursary program in Funza Mshaka and the various initiatives that government has taken, I think there's something dishonorable about saying to teachers, it's okay for you to get your learners to pass at 30%. People like Jonathan Jansen, professor at the University of the Free State, has lamented this point to say that when we up the pass rate, we also up the quality of teaching. We ask teachers to be better, and therefore it means the degree of qualification that teachers have to get themselves in order to sit in front of classrooms improves significantly. So we have to ask ourselves as a society broadly what kind of educator we want and ultimately what kind of learner we want to have at the end of that. Secondly, I think that there must be a deliberate link to reward. So I am advocating for the fact that let's not just simply have a standardized way of paying or remunerating teachers. Let the teacher who's able to take in maths and science, English and technology, that is able to produce pass marks that are higher than what the state is requiring at the moment, be equitably rewarded and be rewarded for those efforts. Because once you do that, you are able to attract to the profession of teaching people who are able to say, let's take this to a higher level. Nations that win, nations that are prospering today, that are creating economies that work, have got the best teachers in classrooms and ultimately have such a high value of education that in some ways, if it's not available within country, they are asking their learners to go to other nations to be able to import those skills so that the country can prosper. So South Africa, we must think hard about the kind of education we want to produce and the kind of educator we want in that regard.
So I assume, Mr. Maimane, that you agree with the notion that some South Africans would have, that the basic education put the pass mark at 30% because they perpetuate laziness.
Well, I think let alone perpetuating that state, I think that it is a demeaning of what South African citizens can produce. Relative to the African continent, it means that we're producing learners that are finishing school that can't even compete within the country, within the continent itself. Secondly, it is going to have dire economic consequences over the long run, all in the interest of making sure that the throughput in education is quicker. And then lastly, which I think is even more disastrous, is the fact that you undermine the dignity of our people. Because to walk out and say you were only able to attain 30% and yet you've been through the education system undermines you, because it means your competitiveness is less, and I think it violates the dignity of our citizens. So if we're going to look at this issue of education, it can't just be pass rates and matric only. It has to be what are we doing in specific subjects, maths and science, and it ultimately has to be about how competitive South Africa is relative to other nations. And I think with the amount of budget that we allocate to education, we simply cannot be achieving the outcomes that we are achieving at the moment. I think it is criminal, and I think it is hurtful to the future of our nation.
And I saw the series of tweets that you had on your Twitter account, and it was quite interesting, especially during a time when we're celebrating and, of course, mourning the life of Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, who was a true advocate for equal education. Obviously, he wanted quality education as well for children, so that, of course, you are able to get yourself and your family out of poverty. So on that note, Mr. Maimane, you're agreeing, obviously, with the Archbishop, and you're saying today South Africa is definitely not offering that.
Well, what was the project of apartheid? The project of apartheid was not only to demean the black South African, but they even came up with scientific research that said that blacks, in comparison to white South Africans, were of lesser intelligence. They in fact offered a policy of Bantu education which prepared black South Africans for menial labor. So if that was part of the sin of apartheid, you would have sworn that in the democratic project of South Africa, you ought to produce justice, which is a value that Archbishop Tutu stood for. So what is justice? Justice isn't just a question of saying, fine, we have peace, let's move on. It's about saying, let us correct. So the underinvestment in schools that are in townships tells you a story of a failure for justice. The ideals that say that we're now asking our kids to pass at such a low mark is a failure to attain justice. And ultimately, if you fail at those points, it means that when we forecast what the future of South Africa 2030 will look like, we will end up with similar outcomes where those with material means, with wealth, are able to prosper and get a good education because either they can privatize it or subsidize it, as ex-Model C schools do. So if you have got money, you will get there, but if you don't have money, you will not be able to make it. So the circumstances of a South African child's birth still determine their educational outcomes. And I think, to me, that is a failure to achieve justice and to correct the very issue that apartheid put on the table systematically, so that children are left behind just because of the color of their skins. And in their instance, in this today's South Africa, they are left behind because of the economic circumstances or the circumstances of their birth.